The fluorescent lights in the Phoenix Police Department's victim services room flickered with an annoying buzz that matched the pounding in Maria Rodriguez's head. She sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her 3-year-old daughter Emma curled silently in her lap, while Detective Marcus Thompson shuffled through a manila folder thick with reports and photographs she didn't want to see again. 6 months. It had been 6 months since that November night that shattered their lives into before and after. Before, Emma had been a whirlwind of constant chatter, singing, "Let It Go" at the top of her lungs while dancing around their small apartment, asking why. About everything from clouds to caterpillars, giggling uncontrollably at her father's silly voices. She'd been the kind of child who made strangers smile in grocery stores, who waved enthusiastically at every dog she saw, who filled their modest home with so much joy that her parents sometimes forgot how hard they worked just to make ends meet. After, Emma hadn't spoken a single word. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Detective Thompson began, his voice gentle but grave. He was a tall man in his late 40s with kind eyes that had seen too much tragedy. "I need to be straight with you about where we are with the case." Maria tightened her arms around Emma, feeling her daughter's tiny heartbeat against her chest. The little girl stared blankly at the wall, her once bright brown eyes now dull and distant. She'd barely eaten that morning. She rarely ate anymore. "We arrested Michael Stroud 3 weeks after the robbery," Thompson continued, pulling out a mug shot. Maria looked away quickly. She'd memorized that face, those cold eyes in her nightmares. "The gun residue, the ski mask found in his apartment, the serial number on the weapon matching the one used in the shooting. We've got physical evidence. But here's the problem." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your husband, God bless him, was shot from behind. He never saw the shooter's face. The store's security camera was spray-painted over before the robbery, and the only other witness," he glanced at Emma with profound sadness, "was your daughter." Maria felt her stomach drop. She knew where this was going. Without Emma's testimony identifying Stroud as the man who came into your store that night, as the man who shot her father, his defense attorney is going to create reasonable doubt. They'll argue it could have been anyone. They'll say we arrested the wrong person. Thompson leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen guilty men walk free on technicalities." Without Emma's identification, the prosecutor estimates only a 30% chance of conviction, maybe less. The room spun. Maria thought of her husband Carlos, still recovering from his gunshot wound, still going to physical therapy 3 times a week because his shoulder would never fully heal. She thought of the thousands in medical bills, the convenience store they'd owned, their American dream, now sold because they couldn't bear to return there. She thought of how they'd fled El Salvador 15 years ago seeking safety, only to have violence find them anyway. But mostly she thought of Emma, her baby, her sunshine. "She won't talk," Maria whispered, her voice breaking. "We've tried everything, detective, 4 different therapists, her pediatrician, even our priest, it's like." She struggled to find words in English, her accent thickening with emotion. "It's like she locked herself away somewhere inside, somewhere I can't reach her." Emma shifted slightly in her mother's arms but said nothing. She never said anything anymore. Not mama, not hungry, not even a cry when she fell and scraped her knee. Just silence. Awful, crushing silence. Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's current child psychologist, had explained it during their last devastating session. "Selective mutism triggered by severe trauma," she'd said, using clinical terms that felt cold against the heat of Maria's grief. "Emma's mind is protecting her the only way it knows how, by shutting down her ability to communicate about what she witnessed. Until she feels safe enough to process that night, she may not speak at all." Detective Thompson pulled out his phone, scrolling through something before turning the screen toward Maria. "There might be one way," he said softly. "One option we haven't tried yet." On the screen was a photo of a beautiful golden retriever wearing a blue vest with official-looking patches. The dog had soulful brown eyes and what looked almost like a smile. Below the photo, Maria read, Officer Kane, Certified Courthouse Facility Dog, Maricopa County Victim Services. I know this might sound strange, Thompson continued, but there's a specialized program here in the county. Dogs trained specifically to help traumatized witnesses, especially children. This is Officer Kane. He works with his handler, Officer Jennifer Walsh, helping kids who have been through terrible things feel safe enough to testify. Maria stared at the photo, skepticism and desperation warring inside her. A dog? You want my daughter to talk to a dog? Not exactly. Thompson pulled out a brochure, pointing to statistics and case studies. These aren't just any dogs, Mrs. Rodriguez. They undergo years of training. They've helped kids with anxiety, PTSD, severe trauma, kids who couldn't speak in front of adults but could communicate with the dog present. I've seen it work. Last year, a 7-year-old boy who witnessed a domestic violence incident couldn't testify until Kane sat beside him. The kid held onto that dog like a lifeline and told the jury everything. He looked directly at Emma, his expression softening. Kids sense things about animals that they can't sense in people. No judgment, no expectations, just acceptance, safety. Maria felt Emma's body against hers, so small, so fragile, so broken. What did she have to lose? Every doctor, every therapist, every well-meaning relative had failed. Her daughter was trapped in a prison of silence, and Maria would try anything to free her. When can we meet this dog? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Detective Thompson smiled for the first time since they'd sat down. Officer Walsh can be here tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, Dr. Chen's office. He paused, then added gently, Mrs. Rodriguez, I can't make you any promises, but I've learned to trust my gut after all these years, and my gut says Kane might be exactly what Emma needs. That night, Maria lay in bed next to Emma, watching her daughter's fitful sleep. Emma whimpered occasionally, her small hands clenching the sheets, trapped in nightmares Maria couldn't protect her from. She thought about the golden retriever in the photo, those kind eyes that somehow seemed to understand suffering. Por favor, Dios, Maria whispered into the darkness. Please let this work. Please give me my baby back. Tomorrow they would meet Kane. Tomorrow maybe, just maybe, there would be hope. The trial was 3 weeks away. Dr. Sarah Chen's therapy office smelled like lavender and vanilla, a deliberate choice meant to calm anxious children. The walls were painted soft blue, decorated with cheerful posters of animals and rainbows. Shelves overflowed with toys, books, and art supplies. Usually, the space worked its magic. But for Emma Rodriguez, it had become just another place where adults asked questions she couldn't answer, where concerned faces hovered over her expecting something she couldn't give. Maria arrived 15 minutes early, as she always did, her hands trembling as she signed the clipboard at reception. Emma sat beside her in the waiting room, wearing her favorite yellow dress, the one she'd worn on her 3rd birthday when she could still laugh. Now the dress hung looser on her tiny frame. She'd lost weight, her cheeks no longer round and rosy but hollow and pale. Maybe today will be different, Mija, Maria whispered, smoothing Emma's dark curls. The little girl stared straight ahead, unblinking. The waiting room door opened, and Maria's breath caught. Detective Thompson entered first, his bulky frame filling the doorway, but her eyes went immediately to the woman beside him, and the magnificent golden retriever at her side. Officer Jennifer Walsh was in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and warm hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She wore a standard police uniform, but there was something gentle about her demeanor, something that spoke of patience and understanding. At her left side, connected by a short leather leash, was Kane. The dog was stunning. His golden coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, professionally groomed and brushed to perfection. He stood about 2 feet tall at the shoulder, solidly built but not intimidating. What struck Maria most were his eyes, deep, intelligent, and somehow impossibly kind. Kane sat in perfect heel position, his tail sweeping slowly across the floor, his gaze taking in the room with calm assessment. "Mrs. Rodriguez." Officer Walsh extended her hand, her voice soft and friendly. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, and this is my partner, Kane." Maria shook her hand, speechless. She'd expected a police dog, something fierce and intimidating. Instead, Kane looked like he belonged in a children's storybook. Dr. Chen emerged from her office, professional smile in place. "Why don't we all head inside? I think we should let Emma and Kane meet on their own terms, no pressure." They filed into the therapy room, larger than the waiting area, with a soft carpet, bean bag chairs, and a small table with crayons scattered across it. Officer Walsh unclipped Kane's leash, and the dog immediately settled into a lying position, his posture relaxed and non-threatening. "Emma," Dr. Chen knelt to the child's level, "this is Kane. He's a very special dog who helps kids feel better. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. You can just sit here or you can pet him if you'd like. Whatever feels right to you." Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her small hand gripping her mother's dress. For 6 months, she'd shown no real emotion, no fear, no joy, no curiosity, just emptiness. Maria held her breath, preparing for the same blank stare, the same vacant withdrawal. But something flickered in Emma's eyes. It was subtle, so subtle that if Maria hadn't been watching her daughter with the desperate attention of a mother losing hope, she might have missed it. Emma's eyes widened just a fraction. Her lips parted slightly. Her grip on Maria's dress loosened. Kane, still lying on the carpet, shifted his head to look directly at Emma. His tail wagged once, twice, 3 times, slow, deliberate movements. Then he did something remarkable. He let out the softest whine, barely audible, and lowered his head onto his paws, making himself even smaller, less threatening. "He's saying hello," Officer Walsh explained quietly. "In dog language, that's an invitation. He's telling Emma that he's safe, that he's a friend." Emma took one small step forward, then another. Maria's heart hammered in her chest. Dr. Chen exchanged a glance with Detective Thompson, both of them recognizing something significant was happening. In 6 months of therapy, Emma had never voluntarily approached anything new. She'd become a statue, frozen by trauma. But now, step by tiny step, she moved toward Kane. The dog remained perfectly still, his training evident in every controlled breath. When Emma was 3 feet away, she stopped, studying him with an intensity Maria hadn't seen since before the shooting. Kane waited, patient as stone, only his eyes tracking Emma's movements. Then Emma did something that made Maria's eyes flood with tears. She gasped. It was a small sound, barely more than an intake of breath, but it was the first voluntary sound Emma had made in 173 days. Maria had counted every single one. Emma's hand, tiny and trembling, reached out toward Kane's head. The distance seemed vast, 18 inches that felt like miles. Officer Walsh remained motionless against the wall, not interfering, letting the moment unfold naturally. Emma's fingers made contact with Kane's fur. The dog's coat was soft, impossibly soft and warm beneath her palm. Kane didn't move except to slowly, carefully raise his eyes to meet Emma's. There was something in that look. Maria saw it from across the room, something that transcended the barrier between species. Understanding, acceptance, safety. Emma's other hand came up, both palms now resting on Kane's head. Her shoulders, rigid with tension for months, began to relax. She took another step closer, then another, until she was kneeling right beside him. Kane shifted slightly, lifting his head and gently, so gently it seemed choreographed, resting it on Emma's lap. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Dr. Chen quietly grabbed tissues, offering one to Maria while wiping her own eyes. Emma sat there, a 3-year-old girl who'd forgotten how to be a child, with a golden retriever's head in her lap. Her fingers moved through his fur, exploring, discovering. And then, for the first time since the night her world exploded into gunfire and screams, Emma smiled. It was small, just the slightest upturn of her lips, but it was real. "Oh my God," Maria whispered, her voice cracking. "She's smiling." Officer Walsh moved slowly, carefully, closer to Emma and Kane. "Emma," she said softly, "Kane really likes you. I can tell. Would you like to visit with him again? Maybe tomorrow." Emma didn't respond verbally, that would have been too much to hope for, but she nodded, an actual nod, a response, communication. Detective Thompson stepped outside, pulling out his phone to call Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Morrison. They had 3 weeks until trial, 3 weeks to build enough trust that Emma might be able to testify. It seemed impossible. But as he watched through the window, Emma now burying her face in Kane's fur, her small body shaking with what might have been silent tears or perhaps relief, Thompson felt something he hadn't felt since the case began. Hoping. Inside the therapy room, Maria knelt beside her daughter, one hand on Emma's back, tears streaming down her face. "That's it, baby," she whispered. "That's my brave girl." Kane remained perfectly still, a living, breathing security blanket, while Emma clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had become terrifyingly unstable. Dr. Chen made notes in her file, documenting the breakthrough, already planning the next steps. Officer Walsh watched with professional satisfaction mixed with personal joy. This was why she'd spent 4 years building this program, why she'd trained Kane through countless hours of work. This moment, this connection, this chance at healing. Emma stayed pressed against Kane for 45 minutes, longer than any therapy session had ever lasted. When it was finally time to leave, she didn't want to go. She looked up at Officer Walsh with pleading eyes that spoke volumes even without words. "We'll come back tomorrow," Walsh promised. "Kane will be here waiting for you, I promise." As they left, Emma turned back 3 times to look at Kane, and each time the dog sat at attention, tail wagging as if to say, "I'll be here. I'll always be here." In the parking lot, Maria buckled Emma into her car seat, noticing something different. Emma's hands were relaxed, not clenched. Her breathing was even. And as they drove home through Phoenix's afternoon traffic, Maria saw something in the rearview mirror that made her pull over, unable to see through her tears. Emma was humming. Just a soft, wordless melody, barely audible over the radio. But it was sound, it was music, it was life returning. 21 days, that's all they had. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Morrison stood in front of her office whiteboard, red marker in hand, counting down to November 15th, the trial date that loomed like a storm on the horizon. She'd prosecuted over 100 cases in her 12-year career, but none had ever felt quite like this. Everything hinged on a 3-year-old girl who hadn't spoken in half a year and a golden retriever who somehow held the key to justice. "It's insane," her colleague muttered, passing her doorway. "You're betting a solid conviction on a toddler and a dog." Morrison didn't disagree, but she'd watched the video Detective Thompson sent her, Emma's first session with Kane, that miraculous smile, the hum in the car afterward. Sometimes insane was all you had left. Meanwhile, across town in Dr. Chen's office, a routine was forming. Every morning at 9 o'clock sharp, Officer Jennifer Walsh arrived with Kane. Emma began waiting by the window 30 minutes early, her face pressed against the glass, watching for the police SUV. The moment she spotted it, her entire body would vibrate with anticipation, still silent but no longer empty. "She woke up at 6 this morning," Maria told Dr. Chen on day 3. "She went to her closet and picked out her clothes herself. She hasn't done that since." Maria's voice trailed off. "Since before. Everything was measured in befores and afters now." Day 4 brought the first major breakthrough. Emma was lying on the carpet, her head resting on Kane's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Officer Walsh sat nearby, reading a children's book aloud, Where the Wild Things Are, her voice soothing and rhythmic. Dr. Chen observed from her desk, taking notes. Then, so softly that Walsh almost missed it, Emma hummed along to the cadence of the words. Not words yet, just sound. Melodic, tuneless humming that matched the rhythm of the story, but it was intentional, it was communication. "Did you hear that?" Walsh whispered to Dr. Chen, not wanting to break the spell. Dr. Chen nodded, her pen flying across her notepad. She's finding her voice again, slowly. Through Kane, she's remembering it's safe to make sounds. By day 7, Emma was doing more than humming. She was making small noises, soft coos when Kane licked her hand, gentle sighs when she stroked his fur, tiny gasps when he did his tricks. Officer Walsh had Kane roll over, play dead, give high fives, anything to engage Emma, to remind her that interaction could be joyful instead of terrifying. Maria watched through the one-way observation window, tears perpetually ready to fall. Her husband Carlos joined her on day 9, his arm still in a sling from physical therapy. When he saw Emma actually giggle, silent, but her shoulders shaking with genuine laughter as Kane sneezed dramatically, Carlos broke down completely. "That's our girl," he sobbed into Maria's shoulder. "That's our Emma coming back to us." But progress wasn't linear. Day 12 brought a setback that reminded everyone how fragile Emma's healing remained. Dr. Chen had gently introduced photographs into the session, pictures of the convenience store, trying to help Emma process her memories in a safe environment. The moment Emma saw the image of the store's counter, she went rigid. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. She scrambled away from the photos, pressing herself into the corner, eyes wild with panic. Kane immediately moved to her, his training kicking in. He positioned himself between Emma and the photographs, creating a physical barrier. Then he did something Walsh had trained him for specifically. He nudged Emma's hand with his nose, insistent, demanding her attention. When Emma finally looked at him, Kane gently pawed at her leg, a trick that meant touch me, focus on me, come back to now. Emma's trembling hands found his fur. She buried her face in his neck, her small body racked with silent sobs. "Too fast," Dr. Chen murmured, putting the photos away. "We pushed too hard." But Officer Walsh noticed something important. "Look at her recovery time, though. She's scared, yes, but she's not shutting down completely. Kane's anchoring her. She's staying present." It was true. Before Kane, Emma would have retreated into catatonic silence for hours, maybe days, after a trigger like that. Now, within 15 minutes, she was calm again, still clinging to Kane but breathing normally, her eyes clear rather than vacant. By day 15, they reached another milestone. Dr. Chen brought out her therapy dolls, simple cloth figures she used to help children communicate difficult experiences. She set up a small dollhouse with a store setup, miniature shelves, a tiny counter. Emma watched with cautious interest, Kane's head resting on her lap as always. "Emma," Dr. Chen said softly, "can you show Kane what happened that night? Using the dolls. You don't have to talk, just show him." For 5 long minutes, Emma didn't move. Then, slowly, her hand reached for a small girl doll. She placed it behind the counter. Next, she picked up a male doll in a blue shirt, representing her father. She positioned him at the counter too. Dr. Chen held her breath. Maria, watching through the window, gripped Carlos's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. Emma picked up a third doll. This one wore black clothes. Her hand shook as she held it, but she didn't drop it. She didn't run away. Instead, she made the black doll walk toward the counter dolls. Then she picked up a small plastic toy gun from the therapy toy bin. Her hands were trembling violently now. Kane shifted, pressing closer against her, his warmth and weight grounding her. Emma took a shuddering breath and pointed the toy gun at the father doll. "Good, Emma," Dr. Chen encouraged. "You're so brave. Can you show Kane what the man looked like?" Emma set down the dolls. She picked up a black crayon from the art table and drew on a piece of paper a crude stick figure with a black circle over its face. A mask. Maria gasped in the observation room. Emma was communicating, showing them what she saw, identifying details. Day 18 brought the question everyone was dreading. Rebecca Morrison joined the therapy session, needing to assess whether Emma could possibly testify. She sat quietly in the corner while Dr. Chen worked with Emma and Kane. "Emma," Dr. Chen said gently, "in a few days we're going to go to a big room called a courtroom. Kane will be with you the whole time. Your mama and papa will be there. And there will be some people who need to hear about what happened that night. Do you think you could help them understand?" Emma's eyes went to Kane as they always did when she was scared. The dog gazed back at her with his steady, calm expression that seemed to say, "I've got you. You're safe." Then Emma did something that made Morrison sit up straight. She nodded, a clear, deliberate nod. "She's agreeing," Morrison whispered to Dr. Chen. "She's saying she'll try." But trying and succeeding were two different things. Emma still hadn't spoken a single word. Not one. And they needed her to identify Michael Stroud, to point him out, to somehow communicate to a jury that he was the man who destroyed her family's life. Day 21 arrived with crushing weight. Tomorrow was the trial. Their last session felt both hopeful and desperate. Emma was undeniably better, more present, more engaged, capable of showing emotion and responding to simple questions with nods and shakes of her head. But without verbal testimony, without that crucial identification, Morrison's case was weak. "Emma," Officer Walsh knelt beside the little girl, Kane between them as always. "Tomorrow is a big day. There might be a lot of people and it might feel scary, but Kane will be right next to you the entire time. I promise you he won't leave your side. Can you be brave for one more day?" Emma looked at Kane, her small hands buried in his golden fur. Then she looked at Officer Walsh, and finally at her parents standing in the doorway. Something passed across her young face, understanding, perhaps, or determination. She picked up a crayon and drew a picture, a stick figure girl, a dog, and a courtroom. At the bottom, she drew a black figure with a mask. Then she took the black crayon and made a large X over it. "Bad, evil, wrong. Tomorrow," Morrison said to her team as they prepared their final strategy that evening, "we find out if 3 weeks was enough. If a 3-year-old and a golden retriever can deliver justice where everything else has failed." The trial was 12 hours away. The Maricopa County Superior Courthouse had seen thousands of cases in its 40-year history, but nothing quite prepared Judge Patricia Hernandez for the motion hearing scheduled at 2 o'clock on November 14th, one day before the Rodriguez trial was set to begin. Defense attorney David Brennan had filed an emergency motion titled "Motion to Exclude Therapy Animal and Limit Child Witness Testimony." It sat on Judge Hernandez's desk like a ticking bomb, 23 pages of legal arguments citing precedent, courtroom decorum, and potential jury prejudice. Judge Hernandez was 58 years old, a former prosecutor who'd been on the bench for 15 years. She presided over gang trials, corruption cases, and heartbreaking child abuse prosecutions. She considered herself tough but fair, traditional but not inflexible. This case, however, was testing every principle she held about how a courtroom should operate. The hearing room filled quickly. Rebecca Morrison arrived with Detective Thompson and a file box full of research on courthouse facility dogs. David Brennan came with his paralegal, carrying his own stack of legal briefs. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez sat in the gallery, their faces etched with exhaustion and worry. Dr. Sarah Chen was present as an expert witness. And in the hallway outside, Officer Jennifer Walsh waited with Kane, the golden retriever who'd become the unlikely center of a legal controversy. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Hernandez entered, her black robe swishing as she took her seat at the bench. "Be seated. We're here on the defense's motion regarding the presence of a facility dog during testimony and the competency of the proposed child witness. Mr. Brennan, you filed this motion. You may proceed. Brennan stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the confidence of a man who'd won 70% of his cases. He was in his mid-40s, silver-haired and sharp-featured, known for aggressive cross-examinations and finding technical loopholes. Your Honor, this is a straightforward issue of courtroom propriety and due process. The prosecution intends to bring a dog into this courtroom during testimony. This is unprecedented, prejudicial, and fundamentally unfair to my client. He gestured toward Michael Stroud, who sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, his expression carefully neutral. Furthermore, Brennan continued, warming to his argument, they propose to call a 3-year-old witness who hasn't spoken in 6 months, a toddler who allegedly suffers from selective mutism and PTSD. How can such a witness be considered competent? How can we ensure a fair cross-examination when the witness may not even be able to answer questions? Judge Hernandez leaned back in her chair, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Ms. Morrison, I assume you have a response. Morrison stood, her burgundy suit crisp and professional, but Judge Hernandez could see the tension in her shoulders. This case meant everything to the young prosecutor. Your Honor, I have extensive precedent showing that courthouse facility dogs have been successfully used in courtrooms across the country, in Washington, New York, California, and yes, right here in Arizona. These dogs don't influence verdicts. They enable truth. Studies show that traumatized witnesses, especially children, are more likely to provide complete and accurate testimony when a trained facility dog is present. She pulled out a binder, flipping to marked pages. In State v. Dye, the Washington Supreme Court upheld the use of a facility dog, finding no constitutional violation. In People v. Chenault Johnson, California courts found that the dog's presence actually enhanced the reliability of testimony by allowing the witness to remain calm and focused. That's fine in theory, Brennan interrupted, but let's talk about reality. You put a cute golden retriever next to a crying child in front of a jury, and my client might as well be wearing a sign that says guilty. It's emotional manipulation, pure and simple. Mr. Brennan, Judge Hernandez's voice carried a warning edge. You'll have your turn, Ms. Morrison. Your Honor, the defense's argument assumes jurors are incapable of separating sympathy from evidence. We trust jurors to view gruesome crime scene photos, to hear disturbing testimony, to weigh complex forensic evidence. Surely, we can trust them to understand that a facility dog is simply a therapeutic tool, no different than allowing a witness to hold a stress ball or take breaks. Judge Hernandez made a note. What about the competency issue? The child hasn't spoken in 6 months, correct? That's partially correct, Your Honor. Emma Rodriguez hasn't spoken to adults, but with Dr. Chen's help and the presence of the facility dog, she's been communicating through gestures, drawings, and most importantly, she's been making sounds again. Humming, cooing, responding physically. Dr. Chen stood when Morrison gestured to her. Your Honor, may I address the court? Please. Dr. Chen approached the witness stand, though this wasn't a formal testimony yet. I'm a licensed child psychologist with 18 years of experience treating childhood trauma. Emma Rodriguez is suffering from trauma-induced selective mutism, which is a psychological response to extreme fear. It's not that she can't speak, it's that her mind won't allow her to speak because speaking about the trauma feels dangerous. But with the dog present, Dr. Chen continued, Emma has shown remarkable progress. She's begun processing her trauma in ways she couldn't before. Whether she'll speak actual words, I can't guarantee, but she can communicate. She can nod, point, draw, and given the proper support, I believe she can participate in legal proceedings in a meaningful way. Brennan jumped to his feet. Participate how exactly? By nodding, by pointing. That's not cross-examination, Your Honor. That's charades. I have a constitutional right to confront witnesses against my client. How am I supposed to cross-examine head nods? The courtroom fell into tense silence. It was the crux of the issue. The Sixth Amendment's confrontation clause versus a child's inability to testify in traditional ways. Judge Hernandez removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Here's what troubles me, counsel. We have a 3-year-old who witnessed a violent crime. Without her testimony, Mr. Brennan, your client likely walks free despite significant physical evidence. But Ms. Morrison, without proper confrontation rights, any conviction could be overturned on appeal. She stood packing behind the bench, an unusual move that signaled her internal struggle. Ms. Morrison, I want to see this child and this dog, not in a courtroom setting, somewhere she feels safe. Can you arrange that? Your Honor, Dr. Chen's office is. Within the hour. I'll observe through whatever one-way glass she has. I want to see for myself what this child is capable of communicating. 90 minutes later, Judge Hernandez stood in the darkened observation room of Dr. Chen's office, watching through one-way glass as Emma Rodriguez sat on the carpet with Kane. Officer Walsh was conducting a demonstration, asking Emma simple questions. Emma, can you show Kane where your nose is? Emma pointed to her nose. Can you point to the picture of a happy face? Emma pointed correctly. If I showed you 2 people and one of them scared you, could you show Kane which one? Emma nodded firmly. Judge Hernandez watched the little girl, so tiny, so fragile but clearly present and responsive. When Walsh showed Emma photos of random men, asking her to point if any looked scary, Emma studied each one carefully before shaking her head. Then Walsh showed a picture that included Michael Stroud's booking photo. Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. She scrambled backward, grabbing Kane's fur, her breathing rapid. But she also, unmistakably, pointed at Stroud's image. Judge Hernandez had seen enough. Back in the courtroom 30 minutes later, she delivered her ruling. I've reviewed the case law. I've consulted with experts. And most importantly, I've observed Emma Rodriguez firsthand. Here's my decision. I will allow the facility dog, Kane, to be present with Emma during her testimony. However, the dog will be positioned in a way that minimizes jury visibility. The dog will not be between the jury and the witness. Brennan's face turned red. Your Honor, I must object. Your objection is noted and overruled, Mr. Brennan. Now, as to Emma's competency to testify, here are my conditions. Emma must be able to communicate responses in some verifiable way, nods, pointing, gestures that can be clearly documented for the record. Ms. Morrison, if Emma is unable to provide any form of identification, if she cannot somehow communicate which person in this courtroom was the perpetrator, then her testimony will be stricken and this trial will proceed without it. Morrison's stomach dropped. It was a gamble. Everything depended on whether Emma could overcome 6 months of silence to point out the man who'd haunted her nightmares. Furthermore, Judge Hernandez continued, I want to be very clear, Mr. Brennan. Your cross-examination rights are protected. You may ask Emma questions. If she can respond through nods or gestures to yes or no questions, that constitutes cross-examination. If she cannot or will not respond at all, I'll strike her testimony. This is a mockery of. Mr. Brennan, I've made my ruling. Trial begins tomorrow at 9 a.m. We will see if a 3-year-old and a golden retriever can help deliver justice, or if the system's limitations will prevent it. Either way, we're going to find out. The gavel struck with finality. Outside the courtroom, Maria collapsed into Carlos's arms, sobbing. Detective Thompson looked at Morrison with worried eyes. Can she do it? Can Emma really testify? Morrison watched through the courthouse window as Officer Walsh loaded Kane into her vehicle. The dog looked back at the courthouse, his tail wagging, as if he understood the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow, Morrison said quietly, we find out. 12 hours until trial. November 15th dawned cold and gray over Phoenix. the sky threatening rain, unusual for the desert city but somehow fitting for what was about to unfold at the Maricopa County Superior Courthouse. By 7:30 in the morning, news vans lined the streets outside, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like flowers seeking sun. Reporters clutched coffee cups and checked their makeup in compact mirrors, preparing for live shots about the trial everyone was calling unprecedented. This is Jessica Martinez outside the courthouse where, in just 90 minutes, a 3-year-old girl will attempt to testify with the help of a police dog. A Channel 12 anchor spoke into her microphone. Legal experts are divided on whether this groundbreaking approach will result in justice or a mistrial. Inside, the courthouse hummed with unusual energy. Bailiffs stationed extra security at courtroom 4C. Victims' advocates gathered in hushed clusters. Law students who'd heard about the case lined up at 6 a.m., hopping to get gallery seats for what their professors were already calling a landmark moment in Arizona legal history. Rebecca Morrison arrived at 7:45, her stomach in knots despite forcing down dry toast for breakfast. She'd been awake since 3 a.m., running through her questioning strategy for the 100th time. Keep it simple. Yes or no questions. Don't push. Let Emma set the pace. Trust Kane. David Brennan arrived at 8:15, looking remarkably confident for a man whose case could be demolished by a toddler. He'd spent the evening reviewing appeal strategies, already planning his argument that the entire proceeding was prejudicial and unconstitutional. Win or lose today, this case was heading to higher courts. He'd make sure of it. Michael Stroud entered through the side door at 8:30, handcuffed between two deputies. He'd been denied bail after the arrest, too much flight risk with the physical evidence against him. 6 months in county jail had made him thinner, paler, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. He showed no emotion as deputies removed his cuffs and seated him at the defense table. At 8:45, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez arrived through a back entrance, shielded from reporters by Detective Thompson. Emma walked between them, holding both their hands, wearing a soft pink dress that Maria had bought specifically for today. The little girl's eyes were wide, taking in the imposing courthouse with its marble floors and high ceilings. "You're doing so good, Mija," Maria whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Kane is here. He's waiting for you." In a private room adjacent to the courtroom, Officer Jennifer Walsh made final preparations. She'd brushed Kane's coat until it gleamed, checked his vest, which read Certified Courthouse Facility Dog in bold letters, and given him water and a bathroom break. The golden retriever sat calmly, his brown eyes alert, somehow understanding that today was important. "Ready, partner," Walsh murmured, running her hand over his head. Kane's tail wagged once, steady and sure. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Patricia Hernandez entered courtroom 4C. The gallery was packed. 67 people crammed into seats meant for 50. Reporters filled an entire row, pens poised over notebooks since cameras weren't allowed during Emma's testimony. All rise. The Superior Court of Maricopa County is now in session, the Honorable Patricia Hernandez presiding. The matter before the court is State of Arizona versus Michael James Stroud, case number CR 2024118456. Be seated. Judge Hernandez surveyed her courtroom with sharp eyes. Before we begin jury selection, we need to address a preliminary matter. Bailiff, please bring in the witness and the facility dog. The courtroom doors opened. A collective intake of breath rippled through the gallery. Emma Rodriguez entered, one small hand buried in Kane's golden fur, the other holding Officer Walsh's hand. The child looked impossibly tiny in the vast courtroom with its wood-paneled walls and high bench. Her pink dress seemed to glow against the somber browns and grays. Kane walked at perfect heel position, his stride measured and calm, his presence somehow making Emma look both more vulnerable and more protected simultaneously. Several jurors in the jury box, They'd been brought in early to watch this preliminary testimony, visibly softened. Two women pressed hands to their hearts. One man blinked rapidly, fighting emotion. David Brennan stood immediately. "Your Honor, I renew my objection. This is noted and overruled, Mr. Brennan. Sit down." Judge Hernandez's voice was firm but not unkind. She turned her attention to Emma, her expression softening in a way few had ever seen from the notoriously stern judge. "Hello, Emma. My name is Judge Hernandez. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma's eyes darted around the courtroom, so many people, so much space, before landing on her parents in the front row. Maria nodded encouragingly. Emma looked back at Kane, drawing strength from his steady presence, then nodded to the judge. "Good, Emma, I'm going to ask Ms. Morrison to talk with you for a little while. You don't have to be scared. Kane is going to stay right with you the whole time. Okay." Another nod. Officer Walsh led Emma to a specially arranged area beside the witness stand. Instead of sitting in the elevated chair, far too tall and intimidating for a 3-year-old, a small cushioned seat had been placed on the floor at the side of the witness box. Kane positioned himself directly beside Emma, close enough that she could touch him at any moment. The court reporter adjusted her equipment to capture the unusual setup. A video camera had been positioned to record Emma's responses for the record. Rebecca Morrison approached slowly, carrying nothing but a single sheet of paper with her questions. She knelt down, putting herself at Emma's eye level. "Hi, Emma, remember me? We met at Dr. Chen's office." Emma nodded. "You're doing great. I'm just going to ask you some questions, and you can answer by nodding your head for yes or shaking it for no. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded again, her hand resting on Kane's back. "Perfect, let's practice. Is your name Emma?" Nod. "Are you 5 years old?" Shake. Several people in the gallery smiled despite the tension. Emma held up 3 fingers. "That's right, you're 3. See, you're very good at this. Is Kane a nice dog?" Enthusiastic nodding, Emma's first hint of a smile. Morrison glanced at her notes, then took a deep breath. Time for the real questions. "Emma, do you remember going to your family's store 6 months ago? The one where your daddy worked?" The smile vanished. Emma's body tensed, but she nodded slowly. "Did something scary happen at that store?" Another slow nod. Emma's hand gripped Kane's fur tighter. "Emma, I know this is hard, but I need to ask you about that night. Is that okay?" Long pause. Emma looked at Kane, whose brown eyes gazed back with infinite patience. Finally, a small nod. "Was there a man who came into the store that night?" Nod. "Did he have something on his face, like a mask?" Nod, more vigorous now. "Did he have a gun?" Emma's breathing quickened, but she nodded. "Did he hurt your daddy?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, then pointed to her own shoulder, showing where Carlos had been shot. The courtroom was silent enough to hear the air conditioning humming. Several jurors were openly crying now. Brennan sat rigid at the defense table, calculating, waiting for his moment. Morrison knew she was approaching the critical moment. Everything came down to the next question. "Emma, this is the most important thing I'm going to ask you today. I need you to be very brave, okay? Can you look around this room, look at all the people here, and show Kane which person was the man who scared you that night? The man who wore the mask and hurt your daddy?" Emma's small head began to turn, scanning the courtroom. Her eyes passed over the bailiffs, the court reporter, the people in the gallery. They moved toward the defense table where Michael Stroud sat, completely still, his expression blank. The moment Emma's gaze landed on Stroud, everything changed. Her pupils dilated. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Color drained from her face. She made a small, strangled sound, not quite a scream, but close. Her entire body went rigid, frozen in terror. Kane immediately pressed closer, but Emma was beyond comfort. She began trembling violently, her small frame shaking like a leaf in a storm. Her eyes stayed locked on Stroud, wide with primal fear, unable to look away from the nightmare that had destroyed her world. "Emma," Morrison said gently, "Emma, can you?" But Emma had disappeared inside herself, lost in trauma, drowning in memories of gunfire and blood and her father's screams. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Hernandez reached for her gavel to call a recess. This was the moment everything could fall apart. Time seemed to fracture into slow motion. Emma Rodriguez sat frozen, her 3-year-old body locked in terror, eyes fixed on Michael Stroud like a rabbit caught in headlights. Her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths, the beginning of a full panic attack. The small whimpering sounds coming from her throat cut through the courtroom like broken glass. Judge Hernandez's hand hovered over her gavel. "Ms. Morrison, I think we need to." "Wait." Officer Jennifer Walsh's voice was quiet but firm. She was already moving, her trained instincts recognizing what was happening. 6 years working with traumatized children, and Kane had taught her to read these moments, the precipice between breakthrough and breakdown. Walsh knelt beside Emma, positioning herself carefully so she didn't block the child's line of sight to Stroud. That was crucial. Emma needed to face her fear, not run from it, but she needed support to do it. "Emma," Walsh whispered, her voice cutting through the child's panic with practiced calm. "Emma, honey, look at me. Look at Kane." But Emma couldn't move, couldn't look away from the man who haunted every nightmare for 6 months. Her small hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Tears streamed down her face, though she made no sound beyond those heartbreaking whimpers. Kane, sensing his partner's distress through some mysterious connection between trained therapy dogs and traumatized humans, did something he'd been specifically taught for moments exactly like this. He stood up. Then, with careful deliberation, the golden retriever positioned himself directly between Emma and Michael Stroud. He blocked her view completely, his golden body creating a living shield. His head came up to Emma's chest level as she sat in her small chair. His brown eyes, warm, steady, infinitely patient, stared directly into her tear-filled gaze. The courtroom held its collective breath. Kane didn't move, didn't break eye contact, just stood there, solid and real and safe, his presence saying what words couldn't: "I'm here. You're not alone. He can't hurt you while I'm here." Emma's rapid breathing began to slow, just slightly. Her eyes, which had been glazed with terror, started to focus on Kane's face instead of the monster at the defense table. Officer Walsh continued her quiet murmuring. "That's it, Emma. Look at Kane, feel his fur, remember he's your friend, he's strong, he's brave, and he's right here with you." Emma's trembling hand reached out, fingers finding Kane's soft coat. The texture, warm, alive, real, seemed to anchor her back to the present moment, pulling her out of the dark memory threatening to swallow her whole. "You're so brave, Emma," Walsh continued. "The bravest girl I've ever met. And Kane thinks so too. Look at him. He's so proud of you." As if understanding every word, Kane's tail gave a single, slow wag. Something shifted in Emma's expression. The raw terror began to recede, replaced by something else: determination perhaps, or anger, or maybe just exhaustion from carrying fear for so long. Her lips moved. It was barely perceptible at first. Just the slightest movement, like she was trying to remember how to form words after 6 months of silence. Officer Walsh leaned closer, her heart pounding. The court reporter adjusted her microphone, desperate to capture whatever might come next. Judge Hernandez slowly lowered her gavel, sensing that something profound was about to happen. Then Emma whispered. It was so quiet that only Officer Walsh heard it initially. A single word, fragile as spider silk, barely more than a breath: bad. Walsh's eyes widened. She looked up at Judge Hernandez, her own voice thick with emotion. "Your Honor," she's speaking. "Emma is speaking." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Maria Rodriguez stood up in the gallery, her hand over her mouth, Carlos pulling her back down even as tears flooded his own eyes. Rebecca Morrison felt her throat constrict with emotion. Even the veteran bailiff, who'd seen everything in 30 years, wiped discreetly at his eyes. Judge Hernandez immediately gestured for silence. Quiet in the courtroom. Bailiff, adjust the audio system. I want to make sure we capture this on the record. The technical team scrambled, amplifying the microphones positioned near Emma. In the few seconds that took, Emma continued to stare at Kane, drawing strength from the dog who'd given her back her voice. Officer Walsh gently encouraged her. What did you say, Emma? Can you say it again? It's okay. You're safe. Kane is here. Your mama and daddy are here. Say it again, sweetie. The amplified audio system crackled to life. And then, in a tiny voice that nonetheless seemed to fill every corner of the vast courtroom, a voice that 6 months of trauma had stolen, but that one golden retriever had somehow helped her reclaim, Emma Rodriguez spoke. Bad man. The words were shaky, halting but unmistakably clear. Bad man. She said it again, slightly louder, as if testing this newly rediscovered ability. Her hand pressed deeper into Kane's fur, using him as an anchor to this world, to this moment of courage that defied every limitation trauma had placed on her. Bad man, bad man, bad man. Each repetition grew stronger, more insistent. Emma's other hand came up, both palms now pressed against Kane's sides, feeling his steady breathing, his solid presence, his unwavering support. And then, still holding Kane's gaze, still drawing courage from those patient brown eyes, Emma did what she'd been unable to do for 183 days. She lifted her right hand, tiny index finger extended, and pointed around Kane's body, pointing directly, unmistakably, at Michael Stroud sitting at the defense table. Bad man, she said one final time, her voice cracking with emotion and fear and rage and grief all mixed together. Bad man there. The impact was devastating. 3 jurors were openly sobbing. One had to remove her glasses to wipe her eyes. Another pressed his fist against his mouth, shoulders shaking. The court reporter's fingers trembled over her stenography machine. The bailiff turned away, composing himself. Michael Stroud's face, which had remained carefully neutral throughout, finally cracked. His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. For just a moment, that mask of civility slipped, and the jury saw exactly what Emma had seen 6 months ago, cold calculation and capacity for violence. David Brennan shot to his feet, his face flushed red. Your Honor, I must object. This entire proceeding is prejudicial and— Mr. Brennan, sit down. Judge Hernandez's voice was steel. You'll have your opportunity for cross-examination. Cross-examination of a 3-year-old who just pointed and said, bad man. Your Honor, this is not testimony. This is a child witness identifying the defendant, counselor, which is exactly what testimony is. Now sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt. Brennan sat, but his body language screamed outrage. He was already mentally drafting his appeal, his motion for mistrial, his arguments for the state Supreme Court. Rebecca Morrison stood, her own voice unsteady with emotion. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Sarah Chen to provide context for what we just witnessed. Granted. Dr. Chen took the stand, composed despite the emotional atmosphere saturating the courtroom. She'd been waiting in the hall, prepared for exactly this moment. Morrison's questions were clinical, designed to establish the significance of what had just occurred. Dr. Chen, you've been treating Emma Rodriguez for 6 months, correct? Yes. In that entire time, how many words has Emma spoken to adults? Until today, 0. Complete selective mutism triggered by severe psychological trauma. And what does it mean, psychologically, clinically, that she just spoke in this courtroom? Dr. Chen's professional composure cracked slightly, her voice thick with feeling. "It means that Emma felt safe enough, supported enough by the presence of Officer Walsh and Kane, to overcome 6 months of trauma-induced silence. Children with selective mutism only speak when their sense of safety overrides their fear. The fact that Emma found her voice at this exact moment, when confronted with identifying her attacker, speaks to the extraordinary courage she just demonstrated." Morrison nodded. "In your professional opinion, does Emma's identification, her statement that the defendant is the bad man, does this carry weight as reliable testimony?" "Absolutely. Trauma victims, especially young children, have extraordinarily accurate recall of their traumatic events. The details are seared into their memory. Emma's inability to speak about what happened wasn't because she didn't remember. It was because remembering was too painful. Her identification just now, made at significant psychological cost to herself, is highly reliable." "Thank you, Doctor. No further questions." Brennan's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to suggest that Emma was coached, that the emotional atmosphere was prejudicial, that a 3-year-old couldn't reliably identify anyone after 6 months. But everyone in that courtroom, the judge, the jury, the gallery, had just witnessed something that transcended legal technicalities. They'd watched a broken child find her voice. They'd watched courage manifest in 2 simple words. They'd watched justice begin to unfold through the most unlikely partnership, a traumatized toddler and a golden retriever who'd given her the strength to speak her truth. As Dr. Chen stepped down from the stand, Emma remained in her seat beside Kane, exhausted but no longer frozen. Her hands stayed buried in his fur. Her parents watched from the gallery, tears streaming down both their faces. Judge Hernandez looked at the little girl with profound respect. "Emma, you were very brave today. Thank you. You may step down now." Officer Walsh helped Emma stand, keeping Kane close. As they walked toward the courtroom doors, Emma suddenly stopped. She turned back, looking directly at Michael Stroud one more time. And then, clear as a bell, loud enough for everyone to hear, she said 3 more words. "You scary man." Then she buried her face in Kane's fur and let Officer Walsh lead her out of the courtroom, back to safety, back to healing, but forever changed by the courage she'd just shown. Behind them, the trial would continue. Evidence would be presented. Arguments would be made. But everyone knew the verdict was already decided. 2 words had changed everything. The trial continued for 3 more days, but everyone knew the outcome had been decided in those shattering moments when Emma Rodriguez found her voice. David Brennan fought valiantly, or desperately, depending on perspective. He called character witnesses who testified that Michael Stroud had never been violent before, that he was a good neighbor, a regular at his local church. He brought in a forensic expert who questioned whether the gun residue evidence was as conclusive as the prosecution claimed. He argued about chain of custody, about reasonable doubt, about the burden of proof. But nothing could erase the image burned into every juror's mind. A 3-year-old girl, silent for 6 months, finally speaking 2 words that condemned her attacker. Bad man. Rebecca Morrison built her case methodically, though she knew Emma's testimony had already won the trial. Detective Marcus Thompson presented the physical evidence, the ski mask found in Stroud's apartment with Emma's father's DNA on it, the gun that matched the ballistics from the bullet removed from Carlos Rodriguez's shoulder, the gunpowder residue on Stroud's jacket. Carlos Rodriguez testified about that night, his voice breaking as he described hearing his daughter's terrified scream behind the counter. "I thought she was going to die," he sobbed on the stand. "I thought he was going to kill my baby girl." Maria Rodriguez testified about the aftermath, about her daughter's silence, about watching Emma fade away into a shell of the vibrant child she'd been. "It was like he killed her that night too," Maria said, staring directly at Stroud. "He took my daughter's voice, her joy, her childhood. For 6 months, I mourned her like she was dead." The defense had no effective response. Brennan's cross-examinations were sharp but ultimately futile. He tried to suggest that Carlos might have seen the shooter's face and was mistaken about not seeing him. He implied that Maria had coached Emma, planted false memories, created a trauma where perhaps only an accident had occurred. The jury wasn't buying it. During closing arguments, Morrison kept her statement brief and powerful. She stood before the jury box, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard 3 days of testimony. You've seen physical evidence that places Michael Stroud at the Rodriguez family store on the night of November 10th. You've heard expert testimony about the gun, the mask, the residue. But I want to bring you back to what you witnessed in this courtroom 3 days ago." She paused, letting silence emphasize her point. "You watched a 3-year-old child, a baby, really, overcome 6 months of traumatic silence to tell you the truth. Emma Rodriguez couldn't speak for half a year, not to her parents, not to her doctors, not to anyone. The trauma of what she witnessed was so severe that her mind literally shut down her ability to communicate." Morrison's voice grew stronger. But in this courtroom, supported by a therapy dog and surrounded by people who love her, Emma found the courage to speak. And what did she say? 2 words, just 2 words: "Bad man." And then she pointed at that man. She turned, pointing at Michael Stroud, just as Emma had done. Emma Rodriguez didn't learn those words from her parents. She didn't learn them from me or from Dr. Chen. She spoke them because they're true. Because in her 3-year-old heart and mind she knows that the man sitting at that defense table is the man who shattered her world, who shot her father, who stole her voice for 6 months. Morrison walked slowly along the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. "The defense wants you to believe this is all circumstantial, that maybe someone else wore that mask, carried that gun, left that evidence. But Emma was there. Emma saw his face before he put on the mask. Emma looked into his eyes. And Emma, despite being the youngest witness in this courtroom, despite being unable to speak for half a year, found the strength to identify him." She returned to her position in front of the jury. "You don't get more reliable than the truth spoken by a traumatized child at great psychological cost to herself. Emma had nothing to gain by speaking. She was terrified, but she spoke anyway, because it was the truth, because he is the bad man." Morrison let those words hang in the air before concluding. "Find Michael Stroud guilty, not just because of the physical evidence, though that alone is overwhelming. Find him guilty because a 3-year-old girl who couldn't speak for 6 months found her voice to tell you the truth. Honor her courage. Deliver justice for Emma, for her father, for her family. Thank you." David Brennan's closing argument lasted 45 minutes. He talked about reasonable doubt, about the burden of proof, about the dangers of relying on a traumatized child's perception. He argued that Emma's testimony was more emotional than factual, that "bad man" wasn't a legal identification, that the jury needed to separate sympathy from evidence. But his words fell flat. Several jurors had stopped taking notes. A few looked openly skeptical. One woman in the back row had her arms crossed, her expression making clear that no argument would change her mind. When Brennan sat down, he knew he'd lost. Judge Hernandez gave the jury their instructions, the legal framework for deliberation, the standards for reasonable doubt, the elements of each charge. Then, at 3:15 in the afternoon on November 18th, the jury retired to deliberate. In the deliberation room, 12 jurors sat around a long table, the weight of their responsibility heavy in the air. "Should we take a preliminary vote?" asked Juror 4, a retired teacher named Margaret Chen. "I think we should discuss first," suggested Juror 7, a software engineer named David Park. But Juror 3, a construction foreman named Robert Martinez, shook his head. "With all due respect, what's there to discuss? We all saw what we saw." Silence around the table. Then Juror 9, a nurse named Patricia Williams, spoke softly. "That little girl, when she said 'bad man,' I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. I've never seen anything more powerful in my life." "The physical evidence alone was enough," added Juror 11, an accountant. "The mask, the gun, the residue, but Emma." "Emma sealed it," Juror 2 finished. "She sealed it when she found the courage to speak." They talked for 90 minutes, reviewing the evidence methodically, ensuring they were following the law rather than just their emotions. But every discussion came back to the same conclusion. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Carlos's testimony was credible, and Emma's identification, despite, or perhaps because of its simplicity, carried undeniable weight. At 4:45, they took their first and only vote. 12 guilty verdicts, unanimous on all counts. Armed robbery, aggravated assault, child endangerment. The bailiff knocked on the door at 5 o'clock. The jury has reached a verdict. Word spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Maria and Carlos were eating terrible cafeteria sandwiches when Detective Thompson found them. "They're back. Less than 2 hours." Maria's hands flew to her mouth. "Is that good?" "Usually, yes. Quick verdicts typically favor the prosecution." They rushed back to courtroom 4C, which filled rapidly with spectators, reporters, advocates, and courthouse staff who'd heard about the case. Officer Walsh brought Kane, positioning themselves in the gallery in case Emma's parents needed support. Judge Hernandez entered. "All rise." Michael Stroud was brought in, his expression now showing the first real cracks of fear. His hands trembled slightly as deputies removed his handcuffs. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I understand you've reached a verdict." The jury foreman, Margaret Chen, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict forms to the bailiff." The walk from the jury box to the bench seemed to take forever. Judge Hernandez reviewed the forms, her expression neutral, before handing them back. "The defendant will rise." Stroud stood, Brennan beside him, both men rigid with tension. "Members of the jury, in the matter of State of Arizona versus Michael James Stroud, on the count of armed robbery in the first degree, how do you find?" Margaret Chen's voice was clear and firm. "We find the defendant guilty." Maria gasped, Carlos pulling her close. Kane's tail wagged once as if he understood. "On the count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the count of child endangerment, how do you find?" "Guilty." Stroud's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed into his chair, his face ashen. Brennan put a hand on his shoulder, already planning appeals, but even he looked defeated. Judge Hernandez polled each juror individually. All 12 confirmed their guilty verdicts on all counts. Then she addressed the courtroom. "Sentencing will be scheduled for December 15th. Based on the severity of the crimes and the defendant's potential flight risk, bail is continued to be denied. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell. Maria and Carlos collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing. Detective Thompson shook Morrison's hand, both of them exhausted and elated. Officer Walsh knelt beside Kane, whispering, "Good boy. We did it, partner." Outside the courtroom, reporters mobbed the prosecution team. Morrison gave a brief statement. "Today, justice was served for Emma Rodriguez and her family. This verdict sends a clear message that our community will not tolerate violence against families, and that even the smallest voices, even those that take months to find, will be heard." But the real moment came an hour later, when Officer Walsh brought Kane to the Rodriguez apartment. Emma ran to the door when she heard the knock, throwing it open. "Kane!" she shouted, full voice, clear and joyful. She wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his fur. Maria watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Her daughter was talking again, laughing again, living again. Officer Walsh knelt beside them. "Emma, we won. The bad man is going to jail for a very long time. You were so brave, you helped catch him." Emma looked up, her brown eyes bright. "Kane helped too." Yes, he did. You both did. That night, Emma slept peacefully for the first time in 6 months. No nightmares, no whimpers, just the deep, restorative sleep of a child who'd faced her monster and won. Justice had been served by two simple words: bad man. And a 3-year-old girl had taught an entire courtroom what courage really meant. December 15th arrived with clear blue skies, the kind of perfect Arizona winter day that made tourists flock to Phoenix. But inside Courtroom 4C, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as Judge Patricia Hernandez prepared to sentence Michael James Stroud. The courtroom was packed again, though the energy felt different from the trial. Less uncertain, more expectant. Everyone knew Stroud was going to prison. The only question was for how long. Stroud sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, the month since his conviction having aged him considerably. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His shoulders slumped with defeat. David Brennan sat beside him, already having filed notice of appeal, though even he admitted privately that their chances were minimal. Judge Hernandez reviewed the sentencing guidelines, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Mr. Stroud, you've been convicted of armed robbery in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and child endangerment. These are serious crimes with mandatory minimum sentences. She looked up from her papers, her gaze settling on Stroud with unmistakable contempt. Before I pronounce sentence, I want to say something about this case. In 35 years of legal practice, 15 as a prosecutor and 15 on the bench, I have never witnessed anything quite like what happened in this courtroom. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez sat in the front row, holding hands tightly. Behind them, Officer Jennifer Walsh sat with Kane, the golden retriever calm and attentive as always. You didn't just rob a store, Mr. Stroud. You didn't just shoot a man trying to protect his family. You traumatized a 3-year-old child so severely that she lost the ability to speak for 6 months. Do you understand what that means? A little girl who sang and laughed and lived with joy became silent, trapped inside her own mind, unable to communicate with the people who loved her most. Judge Hernandez's voice grew harder. Emma Rodriguez will carry the scars of what you did for the rest of her life. She'll need therapy, probably for years. She'll have triggers and fears that other children won't understand. You stole something from her that can never be fully returned, her sense of safety in the world. Stroud stared at the table, unable to meet the judge's eyes. Taking into account the severity of the crimes, the use of a deadly weapon, the long-term harm to a child victim, and the mandatory sentencing guidelines, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced as follows. For armed robbery in the first degree, 15 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections. For aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, 10 years consecutive. For child endangerment, 5 years consecutive. Total sentence, 30 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Maria sobbed with relief, Carlos pulling her clothes. 30 years. Stroud would be 62 years old before he could even be considered for parole. Emma would be 33, a grown woman with hopefully a full life ahead of her. You're fortunate, Mr. Stroud, Judge Hernandez added, her tone suggesting he was anything but. Emma's courage in speaking those 2 words, bad man, likely saved you from an attempted murder charge. The prosecutor showed mercy in not pursuing that. I hope you spend every day of the next 30 years thinking about the little girl whose childhood you destroyed. The gavel fell with finality. Deputies led Stroud away. He looked back once at the gallery, his eyes finding Emma's parents. There was no remorse in his expression, just anger at being caught. It confirmed everything the jury had believed about him. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca Morrison faced a crowd of reporters. This case has been about more than one family's tragedy. It's shown that our justice system can adapt to help the most vulnerable witnesses. Emma Rodriguez's courage, supported by Officer Walsh and Kane, has opened doors for other traumatized children. She was right. The case had become national news. Court systems across the country were calling Maricopa County to learn about their facility dog program. Funding requests for similar programs were being fast-tracked in 12 states. Law schools were already teaching State v. Stroud as a landmark case in child witness accommodation. But for Emma Rodriguez, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she was healing. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Dr. Sarah Chen wrote in her clinical notes, "Emma is speaking in full sentences now. Her vocabulary has expanded dramatically. She's begun to laugh again, to play, to engage with other children. While she still has moments of anxiety and occasional nightmares, her progress has been remarkable." Continued sessions with Kane recommended, gradually decreasing frequency as Emma's confidence grows. Maria started a support group called Emma's Voice for families of childhood trauma victims. 23 families attended the first meeting in a church basement. By the third meeting, they had 57 families. Maria shared her story over and over, giving hope to parents who thought their children might never recover. Carlos returned to work, though not in retail. He took a job as a school security guard, finding purpose in protecting other people's children. His shoulder would never fully heal. He'd always have limited range of motion, but he wore the scar as a badge of survival. Detective Marcus Thompson received a commendation from the Phoenix Police Department, but the photo he kept on his desk wasn't of the ceremony. It was of Emma hugging Kane, both of them captured in a moment of pure joy. Officer Walsh and Kane continued their work, helping 6 more child witnesses over the following year. Each time, Walsh thought of Emma, the little girl who'd shown her that their work truly mattered. 6 months after the trial, on a warm May afternoon, Emma Rodriguez turned 4 years old. The celebration was held at a local park, with balloons and a princess-themed cake and 24 children running around playing tag. But there was one special guest everyone was waiting for. When Officer Walsh's SUV pulled into the parking lot, Emma shrieked with delight. "Kane, Kane is here." She ran across the grass, her pink party dress flying, her dark curls bouncing. Kane bounded toward her, as much as a well-trained facility dog could bound, his tail wagging frantically. They met in the middle, Emma throwing her arms around his neck, Kane licking her face enthusiastically. The other children crowded around, wanting to pet the hero dog they'd heard so much about. Officer Walsh watched, her throat tight with emotion. This was why she did this work, not for the convictions or the commendations, but for this, a little girl laughing at her birthday party, whole and happy and no longer silent. Maria approached, carrying a gift bag. "Officer Walsh, we wanted to give you something, to say thank you, though no gift could ever really express what you and Kane gave us back." Inside the bag was a framed photo, the one Detective Thompson had taken. Emma hugging Kane, pure joy on her face. Below it, in careful handwriting, were words Emma had dictated to her mother. "Thank you, Kane and Officer Walsh. You helped me find my voice. You helped me be brave. You're my hero. Love, Emma." Walsh wiped tears from her eyes. "This is perfect, thank you." As the party continued, Emma insisted Kane sit next to her when they sang "Happy Birthday." She fed him small pieces of dog-safe cake Officer Walsh had brought. She showed him all her presents, explaining each one in elaborate detail the way only 4-year-olds can. Later, as the sun began to set and guests started to leave, Emma sat with Kane under a tree, her head resting against his side just like in those early therapy sessions. Maria pulled Officer Walsh aside. "She's talking about becoming a police officer when she grows up, so she can work with dogs like Kane and help other kids who are scared." Walsh smiled. "She'd be amazing at it." "She told me something yesterday," Maria continued, her voice thick with emotion. "She said, 'Mama, I was so scared for so long, but Kane showed me that even when bad things happen, there are still good things too. There are still people who help. There are still dogs who love you.' At 4 years old, she understands that, because of Kane. They watched Emma chattering away to the golden retriever, who listened with patient attention, as if understanding every word. "You know what the best part is," Maria said. "She's not just talking again, she's singing. Last week I heard her in her room singing Let It Go at the top of her lungs just like she used to. I stood outside her door and cried for 20 minutes. As darkness fell and the party ended, Officer Walsh loaded Kane into the SUV. Emma ran up for one final hug. "Will I see you again?" Emma asked, her brown eyes worried. "Of course," Walsh promised. "Kane and I will always be your friends." "Good," Emma said firmly. Then she leaned close to Kane's ear, whispering something only the dog could hear. Later, as Walsh drove home, she thought about that whispered secret, about a 3-year-old's courage, about 2 words that changed everything. "Bad man." Those words had put a criminal behind bars, but more importantly, they'd freed a little girl from a prison of silence. Sometimes justice came from unexpected places. Sometimes heroes wore fur and had 4 legs. And sometimes the smallest voices carried the greatest power, not just to convict the guilty, but to inspire hope, to change systems, and to remind everyone that courage comes in all sizes. Even 3-year-old sizes. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice, and in doing so, she'd given voice to countless other children who would benefit from courthouse facility dog programs across the nation. 2 words had changed everything. But the story they told, of courage, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a traumatized child and a golden retriever who refused to give up on her, would echo for years to come. The end.